everyone. This is Randy Brandt. We're really excited to have him. He's got great history with K-Fest. He came back from '92 and all those years, right?
Up till '94.
We've all used AppleWorks. You know, to hear somebody who's going to go through the story of it is a real treat. So now we have Randy on the history of AppleWorks.
Thank you. Well, some of you might not know I'm Canadian, eh? So I had to prove it with my my hockey picture there. The great thing is I actually get to play with both my sons now, so that's one reason why I had to leave by Saturday so I could get back for a game with my boys on Sunday. But I wanted to start off with a little quote there from Steve Jobs. I don't think the Apple II is ever going to be obsolete. He obviously didn't have an idea that 32 years later we'd see Ken Gagne wrapped up like a character in a Christmas nativity play or something there. But it's great to be here. I've had a lot of fun meeting some of you for the first time and some of you that I had seen years before. As I thought about how to approach this, I thought, a lot of the information is out there already. Dr. Steve's got his great history and things like that. So I thought I'd throw a few more personal things in there, get kind of some of the history in there. And so we're going to just go through. But before I get started, I've got a fairly useless little digitizer and sound card here out of my 2GS. I wanted to give away as a little door prize. But what I wanted to do is to see who could guess how many Apple II companies I've worked with or signed contracts with to sell software. So kind of guess how many companies it is, and then just hold up your hands or whatever. Figure out. I don't want you lying and changing your answer to the person next to you, but how many companies have I worked with? All right. So if you put up more than 10, put your foot down. 10 and over is too many. If you're 5 and under, give up because it's more than that. I see Mike, you guessed too low. Anyone guess 7?
Yep. Yes.
You're wrong. Anyone guess more than 7?
Me.
How many you got?
8.
Anyone else have 8? You are the winner, David. A2 Central, Apple, Ariel Publishing, Beagle Brothers, Claris, Gem Software, Quality Computers, and the one I just remembered last night, I actually had 7 on the slide, but last night I remembered that, oh yeah, I signed a few contracts with SoftDisk and they sold some of my stuff too, so pick this up later, it's yours.
Okay, thanks.
Not worth a lot, but hey, it's a trinket. So obviously the focus today is going to be on Apple, Beagle Brothers, Claris, and Gem, and well, I guess Quality too. So we'll hit over half of them. And actually, the A2 Central stuff was editing Timeout Central, which of course is AppleWorks related. So amazingly enough, about 5 of these companies are actually specifically tied into AppleWorks. So let's jump back 28 years to 1984, and yes, Norwegian pop band released their hit "Take on Me."
Oh, I thought that was you.
No, yeah, that's not me. I'm not in any of those photos. Tom Weiser back, no. But that came out in 1984, and they had some cool stuff. They had you had the pencil drawn animation, and then the actual video, and they intermerged them, and sometimes a person turned into pencil as they walked into the scene. That was a big hit, and back when MTV actually had music videos, not just reality shows. But that same year, 1984. A guy named Robert, RJ, Bob Lissner, his name changed a lot, but he released a program called AppleWorks that was also a smash hit. And by 1985, they were both on the top of the charts. And now we'll just go with AHA. Instead of being the band, it's a history of AppleWorks. So you see, it all comes together. It all ties together. But the similarity ends at that point, but we're still going to keep using that AHA. And turns out that Bob Lissner had actually started quite a bit earlier, and we could talk about some of that, but I wasn't involved in AppleWorks back then, so maybe in the Q&A if you want to talk a little bit more about that precursor to it, we will. But I'm primarily interested from the point where it was AppleWorks because that's where I discovered it. I never had QuickFile or any of that back in the day. So if we just go back to Apple2history.org, obviously we got the chapter 19 on AppleWorks. If that's all we wanted, I could just stand up here and read it to you, or Steve could. But if we want to get some information that you're not going to get on Steve's column or on his essays, I'm just going to go ahead and jump all the way back to Morris, Manitoba, for you couple of fellow Canadians I have here. Morris is south of Winnipeg. Winnipeg's the capital over there. About 40 miles south is where I was born. And I was looking at that old picture of me with my grandfather, and I thought, I don't really look like a programmer. Notice my hands. I look like I'm trying to be the next Geddy Lee there, working on my bass moves before Rush ever was in his mind. But we go all the way back to Canada, and when I was 2, we moved to Kamsack, the Garden of Saskatchewan. So you see, we headed up over in this area here. There's a couple interesting things about Kamsack, but we're going to save some time. We actually had our school bus get stolen in a police shootout and all that, so if you want to ask about that later, I can tell you that story. But we then moved when I was 12 to the town of Cole, and now we're getting closer to the computer time because here I'm 12. We're living in a small town. That's the whole town. Now, the interesting thing about that is when I was growing up, I lived right here. I worked at this gas station over here. There's no houses in between. Our next neighbor was over here. But what's interesting about it is I lived on the corner of Birch and First. I just never knew it until Google came out. We never had street names back then. Maybe Google forced the town to give names, I don't know. But Google is ubiquitous. I mean, even small town Canada, where we don't even know the names of our streets, Google names them for us. Whoops, I jumped one too many. And they actually have Street View. I couldn't believe it. I went to my town and there was Street View. So you just never know what Google controls, even small towns in Canada. When I was a teenager, I just turned 13, I started going to Virden Collegiate Institute in a little town called Verden, big metropolis I should say, 2,800, whereas Cola was 80 people, Virden was 2,800. But the critical thing about that is that we actually had a computer class. And so that's where it really all got going for me in, would have been 1976, I believe, is when we actually got started. My best friend and I, I've won too many. That was what life was like on the bus, by the way. But we had FORTRAN, and this picture is not very accurate. It's kind of deceiving because we didn't have a key punch. We had to fill out every card by pencil. So we would get our stack of computer cards, and the beginning of the week, we'd figure out our programs on paper, 4-next loops, doing math stuff, totals and that, and then we take a pencil and fill in, as you can see, every single little punch there was filled in by pencil. So the computer geeks were very devoted, and not too many people took that class just for fun when they found out how much work it was just to get the computer to print your name on a piece of paper. But that was my start. It actually went through a modem. We had a card reader and a modem and a printer. That was it. That was the computer lab. So you'd fill out your cards, you'd put them in the reader. They'd go 180 miles to Winnipeg, which is, like I said, just near where I was born. And then make the round trip after being processed. So maybe 15 minutes after you put your cards in, you'd get your printout that said syntax error. And debug it, and 15 minutes later it would come back and say syntax error, and then class was over until the next day. So the people that weren't hardcore quit. They tended to quit pretty quickly. But my friend and I had a lot of fun with that. We actually would do things like shuffle our cards, control cards, and feed them in there to see if we could, break into something, get a memory dump. And I just remember this one time, we'd print out a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, I had a stack of papers, and these were the big, wide printouts, the green lines, all that. I had a stack about an inch thick. I mean, it was, and then I kind of opened it up to look at it, and it was just like this armful of paper, and my friend and I are laughing. We're heading down the hall, and there we see the computer teacher coming. So it's like, cram it all up, hi, Mr. Fraser, how's it going? And he was pretty gracious with us, and we ended up, unfortunately, we were first semester. Well, you know what that meant. The second semester, kids never got to finish their assignments because it turned out there was a limit on how much computer time could be used. My buddy and I used up most of the school's allotment during that first semester. But we both ended up as career computer people, so I guess isn't that what education's supposed to be about anyway? So they were a success. We ruined it for the second semester, but at least we were, and they were probably just trying to print, ASCII porn and stuff like that. We were actually trying to program. So he's still working in the computer industry as well. So I graduated with a knowledge of for and X loops, with variables, you know, some computer logic that I still use 35 years later. It can be traced back to that early FORTRAN class. Well, I graduated at 16, so I wasn't quite ready to go off to college yet. So I tracked down, with my dad's help, my grandfather's 1949 pickup truck and spent the next 2 years working and rebuilding that. Well, I was trying to decide where I was going to go to college and that sort of thing. So that was my project there. In 1979, the truck was 30 years old, and I was a freshman in college with the styling leather boots and the corduroy bell bottoms. But that was in El Cajon, California. You can tell those palm trees there are not native to Manitoba, and Canada doesn't have a lot of palm trees. But that was pretty exciting for me, 2,000 miles from home. And I got to school, and I met this cute girl from a town called Forks, Washington. Well, that's not her. That came a little later. Twilight series takes place in Forks because the author, Stephanie Meyer, I'm not into Twilight, but I found out because my wife's from the same town. She researched the town that's the dreariest, most rain in the United States, and it was Forks, Washington, and that's where she set her series. Having never visited there, it was all just research. The real estate value in Forks has since tripled, believe it or not. But there's my wife back at the time I met her, and so she was the love of my life pretty quickly there. By about my junior year, we were going steady. And she had something interesting about her. Well, actually, obviously she had a few things interesting about her, or I wouldn't have married her. But she had a great uncle named John Bardeen who won the Nobel Prize in physics twice. Only person to do that. The first time it was with Walter Brattain and William Shockley for inventing the transistor. Fairly significant related to my career choice, you might be aware of that. So that was pretty cool. Great Uncle John was not only the inventor of the transistor, he was the caretaker for my mother-in-law because her mom got tuberculosis when she was young, young mom. And so Glennis, my mother-in-law, ended up living with the Bardeen family. So we had a personal connection there, which was pretty cool. But this team had 3 guys that won the Nobel. Shockley was kind of a jerk. He's the one sitting down, which probably kind of fit. He was the managerial one in charge of the group, but he really didn't do a lot of the work. Bardeen on the left there was the physicist who did a lot of the figuring, calculations, a lot of the theory, and then Brattain on the right was kind of the lab guy. This is actually a picture in his lab. He hated this photo because it made it look like Shockley was the one in charge doing the work and they were just kind of hovering around. Really, they did all the work, and Shockley was the one who went to Bell and wanted them to put his name only as the patent holder for the transistor when actually they had done, the other 2 guys had done all the work. So he was kind of a jerk about the whole thing. That pretty much ended the friendship between the 3 when they found out he tried to claim sole patent rights on it. But anyway, as time went on, Bardeen went on to win a second Nobel Prize in '72 with Cooper and Scheifer for the theory of superconductivity in solids. And so True Genius was an apropos name for his book, his bio, which you can find on Amazon. If you do read True Genius, which is a great read if you like history, especially related to computers, wouldn't be here without transistors, right? So if you do read True Genius and you see the name Glennis, kind of an unusual little girl's name, that's my mother-in-law. She's in there about a dozen times. But anyway, so she lived with the Bardeens for a while. Meanwhile, what was Shockley doing? John was raising his niece along with his own kids and being a great guy, college professor. He went to University of Illinois. And Shockley, well, he got involved with a sperm bank. He thought it'd be really cool. Whoops, one too many. Shockley established a sperm bank in Escondido, California, because the whole world should have the benefit of having many more of his offspring around. He was the kind of guy that was just a little odd. Bardeen went the other way. He went the old-fashioned way. He actually had a couple kids with his wife, and one of them was a physicist himself of some renown today. He's published some books and that, and his son went on to work with a Stephen Adler. This is the Stephen Adler that's the drummer in Guns N' Roses, got kicked out for heroin addiction. This is the actual Stephen Adler. I got messed up on my Google search there. But this William Bardeen worked with some of the super collider, hadron super collider stuff, and was involved in that. and is a renowned physicist himself. So the family has been really big in science, big in physics, and hopefully my youngest son will carry on some of that. He's not a physicist, but he has just entered Colorado School of Mines in metallurgical engineering, so maybe he'll accomplish something there too. But anyway, that's the Bardeen family and the connection there. You see Shockley. Notice the difference. Whoops, I hit the wrong button here. There we go. Notice the difference in the titles. Bardeen, true genius. Shockley, broken genius. Kind of sums it up, sadly. But he was a strange fellow. He was kind of into eugenics and stuff like that as well. So that's the story of the early days of the transistor. Well, my wife went on. This is just this year actually. 29 years after she got her bachelor's degree, she got her master's. Took a little break in between to raise 5 kids and feed a computer geek husband who kept camping out at his 2GS and then his PC and his Mac and whatever all the time. So she finally got the chance to go back to school, and 5 kids and 1 grandkid after her 3 bachelor's degrees. She now has her master's. So I left her in Wichita at her brother's place while I came up here. But the sad part of the story is, obviously it's a good story, right? I mean, 29 years we've been together, been married for 29, been together, dating and that for over 30. But I have to confess that there was one other love at college, love number 2, and that is the Apple II. 48K RAM, beautiful, gorgeous, 9-inch black and white monitor, 5¼ disk drive, I mean, beautiful specs. I fell in love at first sight. It was 1981, somebody donated the 2G, I almost said 2GS, I wish. 1981, somebody donated a 2 Plus to the geophysics department at the school. And they set it up in the library. Somebody built a nice little wooden case with a locking, roll top kind of thing. No, I think it would just pop down, but it was a locking top on it. And so they attached a library card at the front desk where you could sign in and use the computer. Well, I walked in one day and the librarian hands me a key, and I said, "What's going on?" She said, "We got tired of you filling up both sides of all the library cards. You're using too many library cards. You're the only one signing it out all the time. Here, have your own key. As long as somebody else hasn't signed it out, you can just go ahead and use it." Hey, good deal. Well, then that was a great start. I mean, I was getting in there, I was playing around, working really hard instead of doing my homework and writing essays. I was learning a little bit about the Apple II and just having a blast. I was completely hooked. It was so cool not to have to fill in stuff with a pencil. A keyboard, that was an awesome innovation. Well, a physicist changed my life at that point. Not Albert Einstein, Robert Hill, the guy on the left. Bob was a geophysics major, and more importantly to me, he was a security guard. And not only at the school, but also he was also working at an apartment complex. So one day I was hard at work on the Apple II Plus. Hey, it's a lot of work shooting down all those choppers. You got to hit that parachute so the guy drops for extra points. So Bob drops a box next to me and says, "Here, I thought you'd like this." He goes, "I found these in the apartment dumpster last night." And I said, "Bob, what are you doing climbing around dumpsters? I mean, we have a cafeteria." I know it's not much different, but still. He said, no, they were next to the dumpster in a box, and they were in good shape, and I thought you'd like them. So I looked in the box, and I hit the jackpot. There were issues of Nibble, issues of Call Apple, and most importantly, the Call Apple in-depth all about AppleSoft. I couldn't believe it. I just started flipping through it, and I just went, there's listings I can type in. I mean, I was a poor college student. I might have seen some of these in the computer store. I wasn't going to buy them. But here I had a whole box of AppleSoft and Apple II resources, stuff that I could type right into that Apple II Plus. So this one was phenomenal. Val Golding, the editor of the Apple Puget Sound Program Library Exchange. It's good they called it Call Apple. He had put together some really cool 6502 routines, extensions, so that you could take AppleSoft and add things for sorting, or you've all seen ampersand routines, I'm sure. And it was amazing. I mean, I could type these things in and they worked. And I realized that this is what I wanted to mess with. I still had no idea that you could make a living off of it. I mean, but it was just the ultimate hobby. So now I had a very serious dilemma: apple of my eye or Apple II, one or two. What's it going to be? Now, number 2 isn't going to care if I cheated on it with number 1, but number one's going to be a little more touchy if I'm spending all my time with number two. And how do I work this out? And so I had a serious dilemma, because obviously it was nice to have a, as a geeky computer guy, it was nice to have a good-looking girlfriend. But man, that computer, I could not stay away from that thing. So I had to get smart. I thought, well, college is all about preparing for the future, right? Now, you're supposed to get ready for your career. Well, Joanna and I were already talking about marriage, so we were pretty serious on that end. So I had to come up with a solution. So, brilliantly enough, I said, hey, Joanna, guess what? She said, what? And she was probably a little irritated because she found me in the library. She always knew where to find me. She'd come to the library after class, and there I'd be working away on the computer. And I said, I'm gonna start a software company, and I'm gonna name it after you, Joanna Ellen Morrison, Gem Software. And she's like, oh, that's pretty cool. What are you gonna sell? I said, well, to have skills to create software I can sell, I've got to spend time on this computer, so I'm investing in our future. It's like, how does playing Sabotage invest in our future? But she kind of knew it was a lost cause, so she at least pretended to go along with the idea. And so Gem Software was born in college before I had any products, but I needed a good excuse in order to have time on the Apple II. So that was the start of Gem Software. Well, I did have another good idea. My wife was an education major, among other things, and she was starting her student teaching. And so I said, I'll create a grading program. So I called it GradeAid, and it was designed so that she could input her students and grades, and it would calculate totals and make it easy to just zip through a roster of students and just have to type in test numbers and total everything up. And so that was the beginning of Gem Software. I wrote some ampersand extensions for sorting and things like that, making use of what I'd learned in Call Apple, and learned all about programming to another level. Arrays. At first, variables were really hard because I could keep track of one thing, but what do you do when you have a whole class of students? Well, then you learn about arrays, and where each student can go in an array and where their grades can go in arrays. Storing data on floppies. These are all vital things for my future career that got me here today. I wouldn't have been an Apple programmer if I wouldn't have learned how to do these things on the Apple II Plus.
What were you studying?
What's that?
What was your formal?
Oh, I ended up, I bounced around a little bit, biology and then geophysics. I ended up going to the dean of students. We had a field trip to the desert in geophysics, and I hated it. And I came back and I said, what do we got left that I can graduate on time? And he said, well, you could go secondary ed English or history. And I liked history, but I found out that if I took secondary ed English that summer, I could read Lord of the Rings for credit. So I said, I'll read Lord of the Rings, put me down for English major. And that was the degree I got. So I read Lord of the Rings, got a degree in English, and taught some high school. But anyway, we moved on. I bought my own floppies. Like $3, I own my own floppy disk. People at school were like, wow, you have your own floppy disk. It's like, yes, it stores 140K of data. That's a lot of stuff, but probably never need more than that. But anyway, eventually my floppy did get filled up. Well, I started selling GradeAid for about $10. Joanna was the beta tester, which worked out really well when your girlfriend finds a bug when she's trying to get her grades done and they're due the next day. That's not a good thing to use a girlfriend or wife as a beta tester. But I actually found out about 5-6 years later, there were still teachers I bumped into that said, oh yeah, I use GradeAid all the time, it's great. You know, other people at school have these $40, $50 grading programs and they can't do what GradeAid does for $10. So it ended up being a pretty cool little product. What's funny is that 29 years later, making this slide for today, I realized I should have put an E on the end. It would have been a grading assistant. GradeAid with an E would have been a cool, maybe I would have sold more of them, I don't know. Then I wrote one called GPA. You can probably guess what that did. If not, you had a very low one. But we graduated in '83. That was bad. I mean, graduating is good, but it's bad when you don't have your own computer and now you're leaving behind the school's Apple II. You know, what do you do? I had a serious addiction, and I needed to find one way to deal with that. Well, I accepted a teaching job up at Hesperia Christian School in Hesperia, which is on the road from Victorville. Well, it's right next to Victorville. On the road from Riverside, San Bernardino up towards Las Vegas, up in the high desert. And part of it was because the administrator told me he was starting a computer lab. And I said, awesome, I'll run that lab for you. And I said, get Apple IIs. And he goes, okay, well, thanks for the input, and they offered me the job. He said, I can't guarantee it to you, but you know, it looks like we'll be able to have you run the lab. So we got married that summer and had some crazy adventures with my green card, and finally got my way into the country. We made it to Hesperia. I walked into the computer lab and trash 80s. I mean, I just about threw up on the floor. What was worse, there's only one thing worse than some idiot on the school board saying, we can save some money by buying TRS 80s. The worst thing was the math teacher, of course, had seniority. It was my first year teaching, so anyone had seniority if they'd been hired the year before, but he'd been there about 10 years. He said, I want to learn about computers. Notice, I want to learn about computers, not I'm capable of teaching computers. I don't know anything yet. But he had seniority, so he got the job. The first week, students were coming to me going, Mr. Brandt, computer class is so boring. He hasn't let us touch them yet. He's talking about computer theory and history. Like, you know, he probably just hasn't figured out how to turn them on yet. When he finds a switch, he'll turn them on, and you guys can play on them. But anyway, we were stuck without any Apple IIs. I was teaching 10th grade grammar because of my English degree. I hate grammar. I love literature. I mean, I took English so I could read Lord of the Rings, not so I could find gerunds and dangling participles in a sentence. So it was pretty bad. But then I got offered a job. Well, first, a friend of mine, Lester Simpson, was a teacher there, and that was great because we became lifelong friends meeting through that school. And some of you may remember, if you were buying AppleWorks stuff back in the day, it was a product. Any of you ever heard of Flexical? It's a calendar program we had in AppleWorks, written Ultra Macros. I see some heads nodding. Lester's the one who wrote that, and so we still have an ongoing friendship. So it was worth it for that year, but it was just sad. I mean, I was seeing these poor kids getting turned off to computers because they had a teacher who didn't know what he was doing. And Christmas was a good break. We went up to Washington, and Joanna's folks were very gracious. They gave me a book for Christmas. I unwrapped it Christmas morning, and it was a book, but it was a very special book because it was a manual for a K-Pro. And then they brought out the rest of the package, and look, we brought you a computer. What had happened is they had a neighbor who had a K-Pro for sale, and I tried to talk my father-in-law to buying it for his business, and he didn't want it, but he thought, you know, Randy seems like he's drooling over this thing. So he bought it for me. I had my K-Pro, you know, it was the lovable luggable, I guess. And I immediately put in some great stuff, used it for writing papers, and actually just this week I found some printouts of some stuff that I had printed out, like highlights of my history class, like for example, finding out on a test from the students that England was a major city in colonial America. Alexander Hamilton was president. Oliver Cromwell shot, who did he shoot? I can't remember. But anyway, Magellan was serving in America also. I can't remember if he was a president or what he was. But I typed in a bunch of those best bloopers on my K-Pro, and I still have the printout. But the K-Pro itself didn't last. I was offered a job back in San Diego, and since I knew that I would not be able to teach computers at the school, and they didn't own any Apples anyway, when I was offered a job back in San Diego in computers by an old college friend, it was really a no-brainer. So I went back, and there was an FM radio network there that was starting up, and I got to work on computers there. It was CPM or something, WordStar, that kind of stuff, but at least it was a computer keyboard I was getting paid to hit. And at that point, I saw the ads for something spectacular, and that was the new Apple IIc, and I just fell in love with those beautiful curves and that design. It was like love all over again. The 2 Plus suddenly faded. That was an old girlfriend. This was the new hot model, and I had to have one. And since I actually had gainful employment now, and I had a fairly gullible vice president at the company, I quickly talked him into paying premium dollars for my K-Pro, and sold him the K-Pro. He was thrilled, and I went to the store and I bought a IIc. So now we're in IIc land where we belong. We actually have an Apple II. So I got the bigger 2E monitor. The IIc monitor was cool looking, but it was just too small. And so I got the 2E monitor and I was set. I needed a word processor though, so I did some careful research, and I decided that AppleWriter by Paul Ludis was the way to go because it had something called word processor language. I mean, who'd ever want to buy AppWorks if you couldn't program it, right? So I got AppleWriter, and I was happy. Now, the one good thing about working at American Heritage Radio is I became close friends with a guy who was an accountant there named Dan Verkade on the left. And if you've seen that video of AppleWorks, Enhancing AppleWorks, me and Dan are on there. So we got to know each other at the school. He was big into North Star. He loved his North Star computer. But we became friends, and I saw the radio network going down the tubes, pun intended, in 1984. They folded about 6 months later, and I was glad I went on the way. But meanwhile, Joanna was pregnant with her first child, and one day she passed out in the bathroom at work because she was so sick. I realized that was the end of her working, and I was just working some odd construction jobs and stuff because I'd quit the radio company. And Gem Software was providing a little pizza money, but like single topping pizzas once a month. It wasn't, we weren't living off of Gem Software. But I was hanging out at the local computer store and dreaming about buying more software. I got to know the manager, and I made 2 purchases. One was GPLE, Global Program Line Editor by Neil Konzen. And of course, we heard a lot about Merlin yesterday when John Romero was talking. And I picked up Merlin because I was figuring out the 6502 stuff for my call apples and that. So we had BASIC for the quick stuff, GPLE, and then we had Merlin Pro for writing those ampersand extensions and getting into 6502 code. Well, the manager had seen me drooling over Beagle Brothers products. GPLE was the one I purchased, but I was looking at some of the other ones too. And he said I should apply there. He knew that I wasn't gainfully employed. I was just doing odd jobs. And he said, you need to go to Beagle Brothers because you'd fit right in there. You love that stuff. And I said, nah, their manuals are good. I mean, they don't need any help there. I'm an English major. If I'm going to get a job, it's somebody needs help writing manuals so I can combine my English with my love of computers. However, there was an Apple II software publisher right there in El Cajon where we lived named Roger Wagner. That's not actually Roger. That's a different Roger Wagner Corral. There's the real Roger Wagner. But Hyper Studio fame, and of course he's been at Kansas Fest. And in fact, if you go on the podcast, there's a panel with Roger and Alan and I doing a panel from like '92 or something like that. I just listened to that this last year after I discovered the podcast again. And it was pretty funny hearing Roger and talking about some of that history because he literally was just down the street from me. They had great software, but no offense to Roger, but some of their manuals were a little buggier than Beagle manuals. They had a few more typos, a few more things. So I thought, hey, they could use a little help proofing and writing, so maybe I could get a job there. So I can't remember if I actually had an appointment or if I just showed up, but one way or another, I put together a resume, showed up at Roger's office, got an interview, he had a Lisa or a Mac XL, one of them. It was really cool. I'd never seen one of those before. But he met with me and then politely expressed a complete lack of interest. No, sorry, we got nothing for you. Well, a couple of years later, Bert Kersey at Beagle was driving a new Porsche 924 87 that he said was paid for by Super MacroWorks and MacroWorks, his share. My share bought a Ford Taurus. Bert's share bought a Porsche. Go figure, publishers. But I ran into Roger, and so I joked about that Bert said his new Porsche was paid for by his share of my products, and we had a good laugh about that. And then I noticed Roger was starting to sob a little bit, so I stopped talking about it with him. But I could have been at Roger Wagner Publishing. Who knows? That was the one Apple II company didn't work out. Well. Meanwhile, Joanna is getting a little desperate because she's getting larger as she's getting ready to deliver, and her bank account's getting smaller. And so we sent a letter to Beagle Brothers, and she misaddressed it. She forgot the second R in Sierra Vista, which was their address. And it was our last stamp on the envelope was already on there. She goes, "Oh no, I need to get a new envelope." And I said, they're not going to look at it anyway. It's the last stamp. We're not going to get another. Just drop it in the mail, squeeze an R in there, and we'll never hear from them again. So she put an R in there, dropped it in the mail, and a week later I got a call from Sharon Kersey, Bert's wife, and she was the one who really ran Beagle. Bert liked to just stay at home and do his thing, and Sharon was the one who ran the office and really ran the business. And when she said it was Sharon Kersey, I went, oh, even if I don't get the job, I get to meet Bert Kersey. I was just as excited as John Romero. He was 13, I was, like 25 at the time, but I was, or 24, I guess. But I was just about as excited as John had been because I was finally going to get to meet Bert, and then Sharon crushed me. She goes, well, Bert doesn't like to meet people. It's really hard for him to say no, and so it'd be a lot easier for him to reject your stuff if he doesn't actually see you face to face. So we're gonna send you a disc, you're going to write some sample documentation, and then if Bert likes that, then maybe, you know, we'll take it to another step. So a couple days later, I got a diskette from Beagle Brothers, and it had a couple of new programs on it. Well, that was pretty cool, like pre-release software that wasn't out on the market yet. And my assignment was to write some docs for a program called CRT Writer. Anyone remember CRT Writer? It was on, I think it was on the ProBiter disk, but that was back about 86, 85, 86. So I got excited, and I created a boot disk here. I wanted to show off some of my program skills. I found the actual disk that I sent to Bert. It says, boot this disk, demo sent to Bert, February 85, while trying to get a job. So I booted up, I had some stuff, and then it had my sample documentation, things like that on there. And I dropped it in the mail, you know, it's like just said a prayer and was nervous that, you know, it would boot up properly and that Bert would like it. Well, a few days later, I got a call, follow-up call, and Sharon said, okay, your disc was pretty good. Bert's willing to actually meet with you. I thought, okay, that's cool. So I went down to the house, saw the same thing John Romero did, you know, the boards going the different way. The ring once for trapdoor, twice for doorbell. There was also a hand in the door, so there was like a window right next to the door, and you just see this hand. And then Bert showed me, you flip a switch, it's battery powered, so it would just kind of do this, you know, so want to scare away kids, I don't know. But it was definitely a unique place to go, but we had a good time. I was thrilled. Sharon took me upstairs, and there's the attic. They weren't all waiting there to greet me or anything. It was empty, but this was the Softalk picture. So there's Tom Weiser, some girl who worked in the office, I guess, Sophie the Beagle, Bert, Sharon, Mark Simonson, Jack Cassidy, who worked on DOS Boss and some of those early things. And then in this picture here, you see young Mark Simonson with Tom, Bert. And then Bert was the type, you know, here's the famous clock, San Diego, Fresno, Seattle, all same time zone. So 3 identical clocks. That was what life was like at Beagle. But, you know, when you walked into Bert's house, you knew that this was the same guy that created all those ads, because it just, the mentality was there. It was hilarious. Sophie the Beagle was laying at a floor. Bert was working on this giant typesetter. It was probably about this tall. And I think he told me it cost like $30,000. It was this big typesetting machine that he did all the ads on. So anyway, we talked about you know, what I'd done. He liked my work. We chatted a bit, and then I got the words that I dared not even dream of. He says, so how about $10 an hour? Like, to work for you? It's like, or what I did. He goes, yeah, we'll hire you. And I mean, I would have probably taken minimum wage just to be part of Beagle, and that was like $3.35 back then. So I was ecstatic. I got to work with Beagle Brothers. I mean, what could be better than that? Getting a job at Beagle. It's like, you know, yeah, I'll wash your floors, whatever. Just put me to work. So he showed me the Soft Disk magazine, and he said, well, hey, you want to go down to the Beagle office? No, I'm not interested. Yes, of course I want to go to the Beagle office. So we headed down to the office and got down to Old Town. He introduced me to staff. Alan Bird was the guy that was doing tech support there. Of course, I'd heard of Decode, so I knew his name already. And I don't know, I think Rob Renstrom was there too. Mark wasn't there. I met him like my second trip. But at the office entrance, Bert had a wall that showed a box in order of every Beagle product, so you could just kind of trace the history of all the releases. And he said, which ones do you have? And I said, well, actually the only one I've got is GPLE. And he said, well, that's kind of a weird one. You know, I've never met Neil Konzen. I've met all the other programmers, and some of them live here, some of them don't, but Neil Konzen's the one that we've never met. I don't even know what he looks like. He said, all he does is just, we mail him royalty checks and he cashes them. And when we wanted to upgrade to ProDOS, he didn't even respond to our request. We had to do it ourselves. He's just a mystery guy. Well, years later, I mean, just recently, I found out what was going on. Neil was actually working at Microsoft. And if you read Andy Hertzfeld's History of the Mac, it turns out that Neil was actually head of the Mac projects, and later on was head of Windows because of everything he learned doing the Mac projects for Microsoft. He took that, learned about the graphics and stuff, and then was in charge of the Windows team. So really, the Windows being derivative from the Mac, you know, I mean, it's pretty obvious anyway, but specifically Neil Konzen was the conduit for that. But back in 1981, he'd helped Bill Gates write a game for the first DOS that Microsoft created for the IBM PC, the infamous donkey.bass. So you've got the, some people have called it one of the worst games ever because all you do is press the space bar to switch lanes. You can't steer, you can't do, that's the only control, the space bar switches lanes. And then when you hit the donkey, you crash. Well, 20 years later, they released a donkey.net to show off the new Visual Basic.net. And that one, you had to actually hit the donkey instead of avoiding it. But it had additional controls. You could do more of it. Well, believe it or not, this year, 2 iOS versions have been released of donkey.bass. So you can see the one on the left is just a clone of the original. And then the one on the right's got the cool updated graphics of the sports car and the donkey. And I think that one's same thing. You got to hit the donkey to get points, what have you. But it's pretty funny that, again, some of these old programs never die. More on that later. Well, back at the Beagle office, Bert says, well, hey, you're one of us now. You're working now. You can have anyone you want. I'm like, what? I mean, I'm just seeing this whole wall of software, and I've got one of them. I didn't want to look greedy or anything else, so I just grabbed the 2 I wanted the most. Decode, which was Alan's debugger for AppleSoft that did a lot of cool stuff, compacting AppleSoft and tracing, and you could literally run programs and set breakpoints and watch stuff change on the fly. It was phenomenal. And then Pronto DOS by Tom was the high-speed DOS that allowed you to boot up like in about a quarter of the time. It was really fast. He wrote it for a program called FrameUp, and that was to display these graphical slides, and FrameUp just never sold. And then they got the idea, well, let's just take this high-speed loading thing and make it its own product. And then it sold like crazy. He made way more money off Pronto DOS than he actually did off FrameUp, the program it was written for. But so I went home with those. I drove home on a total high. I couldn't believe, I was going to tell my wife, I met Sophie the Beagle. And I own Decode. I mean, and Pronto DOS. They're mine. And oh yeah, I got a job that'll keep us from being homeless when you go into labor with our kid, But look, I got Decode. And she was excited that I had a job no matter what it was. But anyway, Bert said at the time, that day, he said, you're going to have to, what do you use for word processing? I said, I have AppleWriter. He says, you got to get AppleWorks. Well, I didn't know how that would change my life. But I got AppleWorks, and Beagle, I didn't have the money, so Beagle gave me some advance or something. We bought AppleWorks. I found somebody to buy my AppleWriter, and we were in business. So that was AppleWorks 1.1 or 1.2. I can't remember which one it was. But I hadn't had AppleWriter for very long, but you can see why I hadn't learned a whole lot of the word processing language. It's so obvious, start PSX1, loop NY, L form letter B. Yeah, real readable. It's like if I ever created a language, I was going to make it a little more readable than that. It was rather esoteric. But anyway, I now had a job, I got to work, and the first 2 products I worked on were Extra K and ProBiter. So Alan and Mark did the first one. It was basically taking the idea of 128K Apple IIs and doing a lot of tricks with that extra memory. So like one of them was cloning, what's that? Oh, I'm just talking. One of them was cloning the Apple, so you literally had the equivalent of 2. One of them was in reserve like a program switcher, so you could run a program in one and then switch it and run a program in the other one, and now you had 2 programs running on your Apple II you could switch between. What got even cooler is you could boot one up in DOS and one up in ProDOS. So now you've got a dual boot machine simultaneously. And so I got the idea for my first ever Beagle product, and I wrote a little assembly routine that would copy a basic program over. So now you load in your old DOS 3.3 basic program, you run my little code, and it copies it over, and now you're in ProDOS, and you save it, and you've just converted your DOS 3.3 disk to ProDOS. Now, if it had ProDOS DOS-specific commands, you'd have to update those, but up to that point, there was no easy way to switch from DOS 3.3 to ProDOS. And of course, I didn't want any money for that. I mean, I just wanted to get on the disk, so I told Alan and Mark they could have that, and I wasn't looking for royalties or payment. I just wanted to get my code on a Beagle disk. So that is the answer to that trivia question. My first ever Beagle disk was actually Extra K that I got something published on. ProBiter was Bert and Jack doing a lot of stuff with ProDOS. So I wrote the docs for those. I had a job. We were having some fun with that, getting to know all the guys. I was writing stuff in Merlin, getting better at that. And life was great. I was getting good pay to sit at home. I'm making money sitting at home, working on software. A year earlier, I'd been dealing with unruly 15-year-olds yelling and complaining about life and detentions. And here I was getting paid to play on the Apple II. So life couldn't really get any better. Then something changed. Sharon said, you know, Alan would like to go home. He's tired of working at the office. Alan, well, let's start at the beginning. Bert was the first guy at Beagle. He got tired of answering tech support calls. He hired Mark to come in and do tech support. Bert went home. Mark started developing stuff. He got tired of doing tech support calls. They hired Alan. Mark went home. Alan got tired of doing tech support calls. They brought me in. A few years later, I got tired of tech support call, a year later, and they hired Mark DeYoung. So the progression of Beagle was always, when you get good enough as a programmer to prove you're worth working at home, they'll hire someone else to do tech support and you can escape the office. So that was kind of the progression there. But the good thing about doing tech support is you got to know some really cool customers. You found out what people wanted to do, you found out what they liked, you found out you had a lot of diehard fans out there in computer land. And so it was a really good experience. Meanwhile, at that same time, my life changed. How did that, I got that slide out of order. But show you real quick, that's Jack Cassidy, Bert, Rob Renstrom, I have no idea who that is. Mark Simonson, of course me. You can see my daughter Heather was born, very young child there, so that means this is spring of '85. Sharon, and then a whole slew of kids. I think she worked in the office for a little bit. Liz was our office manager. And then Alan Bert, his wife Melanie, and a couple of their kids. These guys are now computer programmers. And this is Tony Simonson, Mark's wife, with I think that's Summer, their oldest daughter. But anyway, that was the Beagle office. That was the crew that I was working with in the early days. And then Heather, that one I just showed you, that's her there, and her baby Eowyn. So I've got my new little baby there. She'll be a year next month. Obviously, with a name like Eowyn, she's one of the writers of Rohan, so we're very proud of her, and she's a lot of fun. But anyway, it's 1985, so Eowyn's mom is just getting born, and I'm working at the office, and I'm working on a product called Big U, and Big U was named that because it was a big utility disk. It had a lot of ProDOS utilities. There was a file mover, stuff like that for working on ProDOS related stuff. I didn't realize that same year there was a book by Neil Stephenson called The Big U, so kind of an odd coincidence. He's a pretty well-known writer. But the amazing thing was, Bert, of course, like I told you about the big typesetting machine, he brings in the box for Big U, and I'm just hoping that he puts by Bert Kersey and Randy Brandt, because I had actually written most of it by then. And he brought out the box and it just said by Randy Brandt, and I was just, Bert, where's your name? He goes, no, you did it. I mean, a couple more of my ideas, but you wrote the thing. Of course, you know, at the time I didn't really think. He'd had his name on so many, it meant nothing to him, really. And to me, it was like I'd finally made it. You know, I had my name on a Beagle Brothers box. I mean, I was going to be right up there on the wall next to Alan and Mark and these guys. I mean, I felt like a rock star. I'd even be in the stores. You know, I wasn't getting royalties. I was paid to write that, but people would be able to walk into a store and see it, and I couldn't believe it. My sister called me from Canada. She goes, I walked in a bookstore and your name was on a disc. And I'm like, yeah, you know. That's Big Brother, you know, gives you something to shoot for, sister, you know. But no, it was amazing. So I was writing 6502 code and getting paid to do it, and I had my name on a box. And we got together soon after that, and Alan was talking about AppleWorks and said, you know, there's one place where AppleWorks gets all its keystrokes. And you know, he told us where it was, and there's a keyboard buffer there, and so when you type ahead, when it's saving a disk or whatever, it stores the keys and then plays them back, and it's pretty cool because it's all in one place, and you know, maybe we could do something with that. So a light went off in my head, and I thought, you know, the one thing I hate about AppleWorks is I can't hit Apple Delete to gobble the character under the cursor. You know, Apple Writer, I believe, had that, and some other software I use. I think Merlin did. Yeah, Merlin for sure had it. And I thought, I wonder if I could trick AppleWorks into doing like a right arrow and then a delete, and it would end up with the cursor in the same spot, just gobbling that character. And so I got to work on it, and I started hacking around, finding it. I intercepted it, and I remember the first time I put a character, you know, manually into the buffer and it worked. It showed up. It's like, this could happen. And so I kept messing with it, and I ended up trapping the code. There's an area called the 300 page where memory was free, and so you could put little code chunks in there on page 3. I shouldn't say 300 page 3. And that 300 on. So I intercepted the existing code, and then I would check and see if somebody pressed like a solid apple and then do something different with it. So that week I got it doing a couple of things and showed it off to the guys and figured out, hey, if I can play keys back and I'm intercepting the keys, why can't I just memorize them? So when the keys come in, I could memorize them and store them later and then have a key that would trigger to play it back. So that was when I made the first name macro, where hit record, type in my name, and then a minute later press solid apple and it would type my name again anywhere I needed it in AppleWorks. And of course on the first disk I put my daughter Heather's name on there, and so Heather Brandt was the solid apple and default macro. But anyway, it all happened very quickly in terms of those early things. And so I pitched my product idea to Bert. No way was I going to do this for 10 bucks an hour. It's like, I want royalties now. Big U, fine, but this thing is going to make some money. So he said, yeah, we'll switch you to royalties. And he says, I believe in this product and I know that you need some money if you're going to develop it. So I'm going to go ahead and advance you on your royalties. Just pay your normal salary, but instead of it being your salary, it will just be a royalty advance. So I kept getting my same equivalent of 400 bucks a week. And it was a royalty advance, and I got to work on MacroWorks. Bert got to work on, there's the command, the open apple delete. So Bert got to work on the box, and I got the program done in a few months. AppleWorks 1.3 came out right around then. We had to patch it right away, and because the keystroke location moved. Well, then I found out the nightmare. Applied Engineering had these cool expansion cards, and they wanted to add new features to AppleWorks, and they had a print buffer that they would patch in, and of course they would intercept the keystrokes, because what they were doing is that routine of looping through the keys is when they would send characters to the print buffer. They used that as a timing device, and that messed things up. And so pretty soon I found out I was making all these changes and patches at AppleWorks 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. If that wasn't bad enough, all of a sudden I start getting letters in foreign, bad English. It's like, turns out that there's French AppleWorks, and they're upset because MacroWorks doesn't work. Well, of course, it had different location, because when they'd rebuild AppleWorks with the French messages, they were a different length and it would shift everything, because it wasn't set at a fixed location, it was just in the code. And then I found out there was German AppleWorks, and there was Spanish AppleWorks, and it was endless. I couldn't believe the number of versions of AppleWorks there were. And then they all had their AE expanders, and then Checkmate had expanders, and all of a sudden I found out that here, the simple little cool patch to alter AppleWorks, suddenly I'm actually supporting like 20 versions of AppleWorks. And so that turned out to be a lot more work. But then we found out AppleWorks 2 was coming out. And the 2GS was the reason, or the timing. The same year, they were going to add some new features for the GS, like the memory management stuff and some of the 16-bit code for speed. And I already had a bunch of ideas for Super MacroWorks, so I was thinking maybe it's time to split it off and make a separate product. But quick story: I was in Canada, and I was supposed to go to Cupertino with Bert to see the new 2GS. Well, the problem was, Canada, airports were small and expensive, so we'd fly to Minot, North Dakota. There's an Air Force base there and a pretty good sized airport. So my dad drove me down the night before. We get to the plane, get on the plane, and then it seemed kind of weird. It wasn't running or something, and I'm waiting. Guy goes, I'm sorry, everyone, please deplane. Unfortunately, somebody left the cockpit light on last night and the batteries are dead. We cannot start the plane. It's like, does anyone have a really big battery? And so we got back into the terminal. We had to wait like an hour and a half. I'm going, I'm going to miss my connecting flight in Denver. I'm going to miss seeing the 2GS. This can't be happening. Well, they got some kind of truck out there. They jump-started the plane. And we got on the plane, and I thought, okay, I can relax a little bit because there's nothing I can do. I'm 30,000 feet up. I just got to be patient. We land in Denver, and I race from one end of Stapleton to the other. I get there, and my plane's gone. I missed my flight. And then the lady at the terminal said, well, there's another flight in 30 minutes. I thought, well, baby, I got a chance. 30 minutes, maybe I could still do it. But it's full. It's like, oh, great. Well, put me on standby. So I waited. They called one guy's name on standby. He gets on the plane. Waited. They're about ready to leave, and they go, oh, we have one more spot. Randy Brandt here? I'm like, yes. So I went running up. I jumped on the plane. We landed in San Jose, far end of the terminal. Literally, I'm carrying my briefcase, doing the OJ. through the airport thing. I mean, I'm ducking around people, I'm just missing people. And I sprinted from one end of the airport to the other, and I got to the rental office just in time. I got here around the corner, and there's Bert Kersey going through the door with his keys. He just had his rental car. Bert! I go running up. I go, how come you're still here? He goes, we had fog in San Diego. It delayed us for 45 minutes. So I didn't have a credit card. You can't rent a car without a credit card. So I would have been stuck at the airport with no way to go. But I caught Bert. We made it to Apple. We got to see the 2GS. It was just a motherboard inside of a 2E case, but we saw all the graphics and all the speed stuff, and that was one of the longest days of my life. But anyway, Beagle eventually got a 2E. Mark talked last year about having the 2E at the office and some of the crazy things that happened. But anyway, we got the 2GS, and I realized Super MacroWorks was going to do well. MacroWorks, meanwhile, was doing very well. It was selling a ton of copies, and I was busy working on Super MacroWorks, adding new features, new memory, new programming. Unfortunately, Sharon and Sharon and Alan got into a little disagreement, and Alan ended up being fired from Beagle. Neither one of them wanted to budge. So he left Beagle, but not only did he do that, Mark said, well, if Alan's gone, I'm leaving with him. And so that was the start of the Software Touch. Well, that was stunning because they were Beagle. I mean, they were the guys. Bert was the brilliant guy in terms of the marketing, and he did some AppleSoft stuff, but in terms of actual programming, Mark and Alan were the two key guys. But on the bright side, I realized with MacroWorks flying off the shelf at a few thousand copies a month that I got more leverage. I'm like the top guy right now. And so I went to Bert and negotiated a higher royalty rate for Super MacroWorks. I said, look, this is doing great. Wait till you see Super MacroWorks. Maybe we could bump up the royalty rate a little bit here. Yes.
How long have you been there by then?
I started in '85, so I've been there a year.
Oh wow, that was
So
fast.
yeah, this was '86. So I went from the wide-eyed new guy getting the tour of the office to an hour later, like, hey, I'm top guy. I can negotiate a bigger contract. And we hadn't signed one yet, so it wasn't like I tried to change anything. It was just like, okay, now it's time to sign the Super MacroWorks deal, and I've got some more leverage because Alan and Mark are gone. But it was no problem. Bert was happy to pay a little more because he knew he was still going to be driving the Porsche while I was driving the Ford Taurus, so wasn't a big deal. But Alan was coming out with a new program called AutoWorks. Well, I mean, that raised a little concern because the guy's a genius. I've never worked with a smarter programmer than Alan. It's like he's going to do something amazing. What I was lucky was that Alan really wanted to have mail merge, and so he'd really been focusing on mail merge a lot, while AppleWorks 2 had mail merge built in. So when Super MacroWorks came out and AutoWorks and AppleWorks 2, it wasn't nearly as big of a deal because it already had mail merge, so that didn't help him. He had a really cool macro program, but I had the advantage of Beagle's marketing clout, and so I figured we're both going to. Well, there was another one on another player, literally key player, and that was Pinpoint. Like the rest of their software, I hope nobody here worked for Pinpoint, but it was kind of bloated and slow. We never really saw them as much of a competitor because their stuff was all kind of focused on looking cool with mouse text, but just dog slow. I mean, to me it was unusable, and it never really made much of a dent in our sales, I don't think. I mean, I guess there might have been some key player diehards out there, but it's probably just because they'd never tried AutoWorks or Super MacroWorks. Super MacroWorks got finished. I could never figure out well, here's a shrink wrap, original one, 1986. I never could figure out the cover art. I mean, some kind of UFO, 3.5-inch disc flying through the desert towards these AppleWorks style folder mountains. It was kind of like somebody that Bert knew just ate too many mushrooms of the wrong kind. I never could figure that one out, but it didn't seem to hurt sales any, so I never even met the programmer. Bert had nothing to do with that. But anyway, MacroWorks was designated as the program for AppleWorks 1.x series, and Super MacroWorks was for AppleWorks 2.x. So that allowed me to quit wasting time on MacroWorks. I could maintain Super MacroWorks and start planning the next update. Well, then 1987 came along, probably the biggest year of my life in many ways. The Apple II turns 10 that year. That's kind of a cool thing. In February, Erica Ellen Brandt, my second daughter, was born. The cool thing about that is now she's got a husband who is my buddy for watching football and stuff. We get along great. And she was a fun kid. She worked in Egypt on a dig and lived in Europe as a nanny, and just a fun kid. But so she was a baby that year. And Super MacroWorks set some sales records at Beagle and got some awards, things like that. 1987 People's Choice Award from Insider. 1987 also saw the rebirth of Gem Software, the company I told my wife I was going to start so I could work on that 2+. Pathfinder. I had taken the idea to Bert of, it'd be really cool if you could just walk through the subdirectories instead of having to type them in, like especially now the hard drives are coming out. It's a real pain to type in like 3 levels deep to get to a file. I said, why, you should be able to just step through them. So in 24 hours from the time I had the idea, I had a product working. I went to Bert, he said, it's too small for Beagle. He goes, why don't you publish it yourself? I was a bit disappointed he turned me down, but then I thought, well, wait a minute, he's taught me about publishing. Let's fire up Gem Software again and create Pathfinder. So those were the days when our apartment, I had a chair that was up against the wall, and then if I just kind of got my feet in there, I could get in behind the table and hit the other wall. I worked at the end of the bed, and tiny apartment, 2C was appropriate because it was the smallest Apple II, and I had a small product, so it all seemed to fit. But I decided to make it $20 with shipping. I always hated the hassle, shipping and tax calculating, so I just said, I'll figure out the tax when I file at the end of the year. We'll back calculate so that it works out to an even amount. And just give me $20, you can have Pathfinder. So I made a friend, or I had a friend from college named Roger, and his wife, they were looking for something else to do, and I thought, well, I'll hire her to ship them. And so I paid her a few bucks royalty in each one, and she would take care of filling the orders for me. And Roger and I would go boogie boarding in the beach while our wives, I guess, thought we were working or something, I don't know. But we had a good time with them, and they got to be part of it. They had some fun with it. In 2003, we reunited, hadn't seen them for like 10 years, and we went on a cruise together and in the Bahamas and St. Martin. Probably the highlight of the cruise was firing the cannon up at the fort. I really enjoyed that, shooting at the yachts down in the harbor below. We didn't sink any, we didn't get arrested, probably because I added the flames later when I got home. But it was fun to get the ladies to pose in the back and get our cannon shot. But that was Gem Software booming along, selling Pathfinder. The island is part Dutch and part French if you've ever been to St. Martin. So I don't know if anybody on the island used the Pathfinder, but we did have French users, and so a guy created a French version of it, and eventually Palms Magazine sold it. I think, is Palms French for Apple? I'm not sure. But
P-O-M-M-E?
okay, they adapted it. The magazine is P-O-M''S, but they probably derivative of it. But anyway, they created the French version, they duplicated it, they sold it. I mean, all I had to do was cash the royalty checks that they sent once a month. Now we're talking, $25, $30. I'm not getting rich off it. But again, pizza money, so it was good. Also in 1987, I released Patchmania, which was a bunch of patches for AppleWorks. Stuff like changing the error beep, fixing bugs, that sort of thing. Now, Bert decided that he wanted to retire and sell Beagle Brothers to Mark. He got along fine with Mark and Alan, despite what had happened with Alan leaving. So he negotiated a deal with Mark. So you can see 87 is shaping up to be quite a year. A lot going on. Well, then we found out AppleFest was getting resurrected in 1987. AppleFest returned to San Francisco that fall, and it hadn't been going for several years. And so we had a goal. We got this new product that Alan has come up with called Timeout, working name. Mark wasn't sure he liked the name, so notice the ad. No timeout. Starting this September, you can do all these cool things, all without leaving AppleWorks, but there's no product name because we weren't sure what it was going to be called. So he just made the teaser ad, and we decided we were going to get to work and we were going to release this. So somebody said it might seem too much like Pinpoint, because Pinpoint literally took a timeout from AppleWorks and swapped out the code, and then you ran your own code, and then it swapped it all back in. You're literally running another program. They said, but we're incorporated. And I said, well, think of it like sports, okay? Like a football team, basketball team, you call a timeout, you bring in a new player, and now you get, hopefully you have more success because you got a new, fresh player in the game. And then Mark was a basketball player, so he goes, oh yeah, I like that idea. Okay, timeout could work. And so I take some credit for convincing Mark to use the name timeout. Alan or somebody came up with the name, but we had to convince Mark. So that was the one ad that ran that didn't have timeout in the name. Now, who wants to take a guess what the most important timeout application was? Anyone have a thought on that? I surveyed some people on this. I heard somebody back here.
Sideways?
Sideways? Okay, somebody loves their spreadsheets. Anyone else?
Ultra macros.
Well, I like that, being the ultra macros guy. But no, you're both wrong, actually. The most important timeout app was Superfonts, and you're going, why Superfonts? Because in Software Touch days, Mark created a program called FONTWORKS for printing fancy fonts, and the customers loved it, except that they had to write their document in AppleWorks, save the file, quit AppleWorks, run FONTWORKS, print the font, realize they made a typo, shut it down, load AppleWorks, make the change, shut it down, load FONTWORKS. And Alan knew a lot about AppleWorks because of writing AutoWorks. He said, hey Mark, I think I could make it so we could do that, run FONTWORKS without leaving AppleWorks. And so that research created the timeout engine. It was all designed to run FONTWORKS inside of AppleWorks. And that's why Superfonts is the most important application, because it gave rise to timeout. Now, of course, people vary once timeout exists, which one their favorites were, but without FONTWORKS, who knows, we may have never had a timeout at all. So that's why I call Superfonts the most important one. We have a way to get into AppleWorks, add new code, run it, and change the whole environment of AppleWorks. So Mark created Superfonts. All he did was take his FONTWORKS code and plug it in the way you had to do stuff for timeout. So it lived up to its original demands. And then the side spread, as was mentioned, he did that. That's for printing spreadsheets sideways. And all that was his triple dump routines that he'd already written for Beagle triple dump. So he was able to knock those out real quickly. He spent most of his time writing the manuals, the advertising, doing all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, a graph used by Rob Renstrom, that also used all of Mark's all of Mark's triple dump print routines, but Rob did all the actual graphing, grabbing the data in the spreadsheet and creating beautiful graphs. That one was the biggest challenge. It was the only one that wasn't done at AppleFest. Rob had to finish it later because we just ran into some bug issues. He got very frustrated and had to work really hard, but he finally got it done, and definitely was a very cool one. Meanwhile, Alan was creating QuickSpell. That was the one that he wanted to work on, was a spelling checker. The biggest trick to QuickSpell, I don't know if any of you were using them in the day when QuickSpell was the new spelling checker on the block, but it was blazingly fast compared to everyone else. What Alan did was he did some studies and came up with 300 of the most commonly used words, compressed those into a little RAM-based dictionary that got loaded in with the program. So as soon as you ran QuickSpell, it blazed through the most common words, made a list of what was left, compared that to the custom dictionary on the disk, and then you had a high-speed routine to look on the disk and look at the rest of the dictionary, and then you popped up your list of words that didn't know if you wanted to learn them, ignore them, what have you. That little caching technique is what made it so fast, because he was able to get right checking without having to wait to load something else in. So anyway, that was QuickSpell. Actually, some of that same compression approach that Alan used there, is I used some of those similar concepts, not as code, but used some of the similar concepts when I did Online Army Knife. Years later, I'll talk about that a little bit if we have time. But anyway, I made some good money because of QuickSpell, because a lot of people had RAM disks, and I came up with the idea of I could write a little program called Spell Copy that will just automatically copy your disks onto your dictionary disks onto the RAM disk, and then launch AppleWorks. So you run Spell Copy, and when you boot it up in the morning, it would copy your dictionaries over and then run AppleWorks, and away you were. Now you had even faster spell checking, because even the disk-based stuff was coming off of a RAM disk instead of off of a hard drive, or 3.5, or heaven forbid a 5 1/4. You don't want to do spell checking off of 5 1/4. Speaking of which, when I was still back in the 2+ in college, I remember some guy had a Bible program, and he was so impressed because with like less than 15 disk swaps in less than 4 hours, you could find every occurrence of like a certain word if you're doing a theological study. Nowadays, less time than it takes to swap one disk, you could search for all the words, but he was telling me, yeah, like in 4 hours you can find every one, which is a lot faster than, I guess, paging through manually. But anyway, I sold a few hundred spell copies for $12.50, and eventually we built that into AppleWorks, so just the configuration, you could tell it to copy your disks up onto the RAM disk. Then there was Desk Tools. And that was just a little collection, a bunch of programmers, including my old friend Dan Verkade. I brought him over he was doing something else, working as accountant again, and I said, hey, you want to write something? Let me show you how and get you working on the Apple. And so he did that. And a couple of old college friends, Howard and Glenn, were BYU buddies of Mark from school. And so we had a whole collection of people contributing to that. Well, that left my projects. I had Timeout Final Master with the prescient orange, and predicting someday I'd be a Broncos fan living in Colorado. I didn't know it at the time. I was a diehard Chargers fan. But that just took the big U file copy stuff that we had in there and disk utilities, and I just basically converted those all over. So I knocked that one out pretty fast. The coolest thing about that was 3.5-inch discs were getting big. Do you remember that the Apple II had the 800K 3.5-inch drive before the Mac did? The Mac had 400K, we had 800. But if you could only afford one of those, man, it's a pain to copy. You know, with the Apple system utilities, you're doing 20 swaps, pulling your discs in and out. So what I did was say, well, people got these big memory cards, we just read it all into RAM, and then you just start popping in 3.5s and write out as many copies as you want without having to do any more disk swaps. So each swap was writing out another 3.5-inch disk, so it made duplication a little handier. Then, of course, the biggie, Ultra Macros, and that was, you know, that's my definitive product, obviously. I can't believe the stuff people came up with. You know, here at Kansas Fest, you know, we saw guys like Dave Gare and Tom Hoover creating for Genie, the old message board system, and CompuServe. Dave was CompuServe, Tom was Genie. And they wrote these full-blown programs so that you could grab all your messages. You know, time was of a premium online. You grab it real quick, get offline, and then you did all your processing with macros to sort and organize. And they just wrote some amazing applications, and people did stuff that I never even dreamed of. But the beauty of Timeout was allowed me to create several different Timeout apps for things like compiling, you know, your source code in AppleWorks word processor into macros, and launching different macro sets and chaining them together so that you could have unlimited size programs and all that kind of fun stuff. That was great. I figured out that I spent over 1,000 hours on it, and I think it definitely was worth every minute, because we sold a lot of them and made some decent money. Never, not millionaire money like Bob Lissner, Bert, and Mark, but enough to make a decent living and raise some kids on for a while. Well, we all worked like madmen to finish, especially Mark, you know, being the company president, knowing he was going to make the most money off it, he felt obligated to stay up rather late. So he was putting together all the promo materials as well as his products. I admit that I wasn't thrilled. I guess I don't have a manual here, but you know, we left the Beagle, the humor, the woodcuts, the art, left that behind, and I didn't like it, you know. And Mark's like, no, Claris wants it to be professional business, AppleWorks style, and I was like, yeah, man, people see Beagle, they want humor, you know, they want it to be fun. But I lost that one. In retrospect, we could have done the manuals in crayons, and they would have sold just as well once people saw the products. You know, the manuals weren't selling them; it was the performance. Once people saw the demos, they were sold. And September arrived. We were on our way to Frisco. We worked crazy hours to get everything done and duplicated and loaded up and hauled these cases and cases of Timeout products up to San Francisco. And this is obviously that first morning, because we don't look exhausted yet. That's Rob Renstrom there, Alan Bird, John Obrick, who is a friend of Mark and Alan from college, who was involved in the marketing and then later was a founder with Rob of Westcode Software. Of course, Bert, you know, and that shows there were no hard feelings. He was no longer part of Beagle Brothers, but he came up to help promote Timeout, and it's kind of his last appearance as a visual, you know, marketing PR face of Beagle Brothers. So people that got to see him there got a treat, because that was kind of like his last public appearance anywhere, I think. Mark DeYoung, he was the guy who replaced me on tech support, and he did Timeout Telecom. Of course, me, Liz back there, the Beagle guys, and of course Mark. So that we later on built a much fancier booth for the next Apple Fest, but that was our first shot at it. You see these two GSs, they're all set up with Timeout, and the doors opened up, and because of the ads and the rumors, the crowds just rushed in. I think it started about 8:30 in the morning, and I got my first break at 5:30 p.m. when they cleared out the hall, and I did not get lunch or anything. It was just nonstop demoing for 9 hours. I was totally exhausted and totally on an adrenaline high. looking out, seeing people walking off with these big plastic shopping bags full of boxes. I mean, you know, the timeout boxes were pretty big. People were buying 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, it's like, got Ultra Macros? Yeah. File Master? Okay. And then people started getting their manuals autographed. I mean, at one point I counted 30 people lined up just to get autographs. I thought, this is crazy. It was like being a rock star. And not only that, we're getting paid to play with Apple IIs. I mean, life can't be better than this. So it got better. Insider put on a big party, invited everybody up to one of the towers in San Francisco. I don't know what floor it was, but who shows up at the party but Steve Wozniak? So that was awesome. I got to meet Steve. I waited my turn patiently, and he was talking to somebody, and then he kind of turned to me, and I said, "Hi, Steve. My name's Randy. I'm with Beagle Brothers." And his face just lights up. He goes, "Beagle Brothers, I love your stuff. I buy 2 of everything, 1 for myself and 1 to give away." I'm like, "Thanks, Steve." One of my huge regrets in life is that nobody had a camera. I just wish I had a picture to show you of me with Steve Wozniak. But what I should have done is showed you my next Steve Wozniak highlight, and that was I took a screenshot when he asked to be my Facebook, if I'd be his Facebook friend. I should have captured that and put it up there. So that's definitely one of my life highlights, because we all loved Woz. I mean, Jobs, like, okay, he's smart, marketing, whatever, but he's not really a programmer or any of that. I mean, the programmers all thought Steve Wozniak was the man, and we loved meeting him, and we loved the fact that he loved Beagle Brothers. Well, we all vowed to take a week off after that. I mean, Time Out was going to be a smash hit because we sold a ton at the show. But who goes to Apple Fest? It's the main marketing people, the promo people at a user group, right? I mean, the top people, right? They're going to go back to their user groups and tell all the people that stayed home, and the magazine editors and the columnists, they're going to go back and write articles. So it's kind of the movers and shakers that go to San Francisco for something like Apple Fest. That's going to multiply tremendously when they get back to their hometowns and start showing people, you've got to get this Time Out stuff. And so we knew it was a smash hit. I mean, there was absolutely no doubt about it. Momentum was going to build up. And so we all vowed that we're going to take a week off. We're going to hit the beach and scare all the tan surfers with our pasty white programmer bodies. And we are going to relax. Somehow I got the honor of riding back in Mark's BMW from San Francisco. It was just me and Mark. I don't know what happened there. But Mark typically, doing about 90 miles an hour. Maybe that's what kept me awake, swerving around cars and stuff. I couldn't sleep even though I was exhausted. And by the time we got to LA, I had ideas for 3 new Time Out apps. It became Time Out Power Pack. And Monday morning, I was hard at work on them. So my big week vacation lasted from the time I got home till I woke up the next morning. And I was back at work. That paid off because August of '88, Insider gave it Power Pack Editor's Choice Award, so I guess it was a worthwhile endeavor. But meanwhile, we discovered Apple wasn't made up just of geniuses. We found out that somebody thought it'd be a really good idea to take, remember AppleWorks is selling like 1,000 a day. I mean, this is the #1 software product. Some genius thought, hey, let's take all the registration cards people have sent in and throw them in a dumpster. And let's not worry about if anyone actually entered them in a database first, because they're taking up space. So they threw out all the registration cards, and there was no database. I mean, this is your market. These people have spent a couple $100 typically a piece. They're your customers, and I mean, people kill for that kind of market information. I mean, this is the mailing list you want. The people that have already bought your product, they threw them all away. So they were deciding to spin off a company called Claris. And they figured they better have a mailing list. So they decided, let's fix a few bugs and let's create a new product primarily for the purpose of getting that registration information back. that was the main motivation for 2.1, because they were spinning off Claris. They had to get some information so Claris would have a good foothold in the market. So that's what AppleWorks 2.1 was. That was the Get Customer Names release. And so they ran an ad that said, AppleWorks has received an unusual upgrade. They were right, it was very unusual, but they didn't tell people the real reason it was an unusual upgrade. They said, it's got its own company. Yay, Claris is the new company of AppleWorks. But the unusual upgrade was that it was an upgrade to get mailing information. Well, that created the, oops, hit the wrong one there. There we go. That created the infamous, or not infamous, the famous Porsche ad. Some Apple II owners still don't have AppleWorks. Well, Mark, did I get my names right? Mark came into the office holding Insider and like, guys, look at this ad. You thinking what I'm thinking? We're like, oh yeah, no doubt. Some AppleWorks owners still don't have timeout. We made that ad and, you know, didn't take long. Mark called some guy, that I think a Porsche dealer, got 4 wheels, got a photographer, and it was the cheapest ad we ever created, and memorable and effective. So there's the original. Apple II owners don't have AppleWorks. Some AppleWorks owners still don't have timeout. Now, if you start thinking about the analogies, they kind of break down a bit, but the visual, perfect tie-in. What's Pinpoint going to do? I mean, if they do any riff off of that car, everyone's going to call them lame copycats. You know, I mean, we had the perfect ad because we tied into that memorable red Porsche, and we had the perfect ad for it. So that was a fun time. 1988 was AppleWorks and Timeout are sailing along, and created one new product that I really like a lot. I think I've got, Timeout Spread Tools. There it is. It has major features including cell link, which I wrote. That was my favorite, not just because I wrote it, but because it allowed you to not only import from another spreadsheet on the desktop, but I took the time to write code so it could import from the disk, read the disk format. So the beauty of that was you could have like a year-end spreadsheet and import off of 12 monthly spreadsheets. And if you didn't have a lot of memory in your Apple and you just wanted to read the data in anyway, it could just read it right off the disk. So you only had to load in one file, hit calculate, and it would read in all the other 12 monthly files. So even if you had limited memory, you could still do some really cool stuff with linking dozens of spreadsheets together. So that was 1988. We're sailing along with that. Alan wrote some cool stuff on there, and Dan was getting more involved. Also 1988, Late Night Patches, a kid named Mark Munns contacted me. He was a Beagle fan. He was just starting college up in Washington State, and we became friends. We were both Letterman fans at the time. And you know, who knew that 16 years later I'd have a friend that was, a son, who was on the Late Show. So you see Matthew there with Paul Schaefer after the show, getting a photo with him. And then our guest at the taping of Letterman was Tom, of course, because Tom was living in New York. His wife was teaching at Columbia. So there's Tom Weiser in the back taking a picture at their kitchen table in their apartment as Matthew is demonstrating the, put an egg on top of his hand and bend his fingers backwards until the egg broke. It sounded like his fingers snapping when the eggshell cracked. But Tom's wife was impressed, and so she took him over to another couple of professors. This was on the Columbia campus. So we went over to another professor's apartment and did the egg trick for them. We don't have any eggs, and then the guy ran down to the store, you know, all-nighter store, and grabbed a couple eggs, came back, and he demonstrated the trick there. So fun times. But anyway, 1988, also a friend of mine named Matt Reimer. I'd met him when I was a student teaching, and he was a student, came up, and I was writing code on paper. You know, John and Merrill talked about that. I'm sitting there subbing with all these kids, and they're doing their homework, and so I'm writing code. And Matt came up with a question, said, "Oh, you program?" I said, "Yeah, I love programming." And so we started talking, became friends, and then I got started at Beagle. I got him involved. Well, he wrote this little paint program. Wasn't really big enough for Beagle yet, but we published it through Gem Software called MiniPaint, 2GS specific. And then, of course, later on, that grew into, a couple years later, into the Platinum Paint program. How many of you have seen Platinum Paint? Big thing about Platinum Paint was just the speed. Matt was a real speed freak. And there were some other ones out there that the only involvement I had with it, other than MiniPaint, was I helped Matt figure out the algorithm for the color averaging. So when you wanted to blend two colors together, how do you figure out what the best color is given any two colors? So it's kind of this 3D space because you've got red, green, and blue values. And so I helped him come up with an algorithm that turned out to work really well. And it had much more accurate blending than some of the other programs that were out there. And he made it really fast. I had a little disk called ROS 16. It was stood for like row-oriented source editor, or Randy's own screen editor. I never knew what exactly the ROS stood for, but it was a full screen editor like AppleWorks for Orca M, and so it plugged right in. And that was the one program written with my editor. So I wrote an editor, sold copies of it, but the one program we used it for is Matt wrote it to write, used it to write Platinum Paint. So those are some fun times. But that was still in 1988 in the mini paint stage when we published that.
Platinum Paint was released by Beagle.
Yes, Beagle released Platinum Paint in 1990. So two years later, Matt kept working on it pretty continuously. Now here's the bizarre thing. You want weird stories? You won't get this, not even on chapter 19 of Dr. Steve's write-up. Matt is this kid that I meet in a class in San Diego when I'm subbing. We become friends. I get him involved at Beagle. We're doing all this stuff. I got to be friends with his family. So one day, Matt, I'm going down there to like get a disc or something, and his grandpa's visiting. So I say hi, and we talk a little bit. You know, where are you from? He goes, oh, I'm from Canada. You know, it's like, oh, really? I'm originally Canadian too. You know, that's where I'm from. We start talking a little more. You know, what's your name? I'm, you know, Randy Brandt. Turns out, in 1930s, there's an oil company called Trump Oil in Morrison, Manitoba, where I was born. Two young guys working there. Matt's grandfather and my grandfather were best friends. They ate lunch together on breaks at work. And 50 years later, 2,000 miles away, their grandsons became buddies and were friends for years before they ever found out that there was a family connection 2 generations before. I just thought that is just so wild. Because he goes, it wasn't that I just knew my grandfather died in 1972. So, I mean, this was 30 years after my grandfather died. But he said, it wasn't just that I knew who your grandfather was. He was my buddy. I mean, we'd take breaks together, sit on the outside in the sun and eat lunch and chat. And it's like we're a small world. But anyway, Matt and I are still good friends, and he's still working in the computer industry. I think he's doing embedded device stuff. But a great guy and bizarre family connection. I guess it was meant to be. Well, Claris, speaking of bizarre, when I did a search on Google for Claris graphics, I got the irony here one. This has nothing to do with the actual company, but that's what came up. But we made some good friends at Claris. Bob Lissner, as I showed you, he was a volunteer 8th grade teacher. He was a home builder. He had no more interest in AppleWorks. So Claris got an immediate no from him when they talked about doing an upgrade. He was done with that. He made tons and tons of money. He was finished. So we had gotten to know John Kinder and Elisa Nakata, and well, before I talk about that, this is Bob right here. This is the '88 Apple Fest, which would have been Boston spring of '88, so the second Apple Fest. So I did get to meet him there. Like I said, he had no interest in creating it. He saw what we were doing. He figured that we'd do a better job than he would anyway, because he hadn't even looked at it for a while. You know, like we knew the code better than he did, because to him that was in the past. To us, that was our life every day. It was AppleWorks code. So, the great thing about this, he talked about a history of AppleWorks, and then I did a demo, and I set up a macro that just started from scratch. You just booted up AppleWorks completely hands off. I just talked really fast. You probably have a hard time believing I can talk fast, but I can actually talk pretty fast. I just walked it through this macro, and it created a database of like baseball players, and then it took the information, created a spreadsheet, pasted it in, highlighted the stuff, manipulated it, called out time-up graph, created a beautiful graph, drew the whole thing, and then I took a breath. And Bob, I looked over at Bob, and he was just, that's AppleWorks? He just definitely had no interest in upgrading it after all the stuff we've been doing. He goes, no, you guys take it from here, you know. So it was great to meet him, and he actually signed I got a picture with him, and I also got him to sign something, and he put thanks for making AppleWorks so much better. So that was pretty cool. Good guy. This was put on by a national AppleWorks user group, the Warren Williams and their group at NOG put on that panel. So that was really cool. But anyway, Claris had to find somebody else. They had a couple people that were big on Pinpoint. So like, let's get Pinpoint to do the new AppleWorks. And we were like, yeah, that's a good idea, but you know what, let's float it by a couple user groups first. So I think there's 2 people that Claris went out to meet several different user groups, and they came back and said, every user group we go to says, are you out of your minds? Don't hire Pinpoint, get Beagle Brothers. Haven't you seen Timeout? And they showed them at the user groups. They demoed to Claris. They showed them Timeout at user groups and convinced Claris to then call us And of course, we negotiated it out, and of course, Claris ended up hiring some of us at Beagle to, well, they actually hired Beagle Brothers, and then through Beagle, we worked on AppleWorks 3. So we were very thankful for user groups. Without user groups, it would have been pinpoint doing the new AppleWorks. But the three of us that committed, the project was called Spike, and there's my official Spike shirt. Snoopy's little brother that lives out in the desert. Codename Spike, AppleWorks 3.0. Claris got us all nice little shirts. And we got to work. It was not a very good paying contract. We knew that going in. But we also knew that we would have control of AppleWorks from then on. So it was like, it didn't really matter. We would do it for free, probably. But Alan took the word processor, Rob did the spreadsheet, I had the database and the desktop stuff, and then I was pretty good friends with the people at Claris, and I talk a little more. Alan's real quiet, and Rob's not real rowdy either, so I got to be project manager of that, and that ended up being my role for AppleWorks 3, 4, and 5. So the code turned out to all be in MPW, Macintosh Programmers Workshop. They had a cross-assembler. Well, we were doing everything in Merlin. It's like, you know, there's so much code, it's going to take weeks at best to convert all this code to Merlin. Maybe it's time to just bite the bullet. So we all decided to spend the money and buy Macintosh 2s. Now, a 4 meg Macintosh 2 then, with the Apple developer discount that they gave to registered developers, was still like $4,000. But I can't remember if it was Claris or Apple, but somebody said, we'll advance you the money, we'll give you the discount, and we'll ship you Mac 2s. So one day at the office at Beagle, there's like 4 Mac 2s show up, the stacks of boxes, and we all had our Mac 2s. We installed MPW, the Macintosh Programmers Workshop. Step one is to take all the code and see if we could build it, and we compiled, and then do a binary compare to the shipping copy of AppleWorks, because believe me, there have been times in the software industry companies have taken over projects and they've never been able to match up the source and the object. That happened with some later stuff with Beagle, right? But we matched it up, we were underway, and the timeout world was still moving ahead. I released Macro Tools, which is a bunch of peeks and pokes and things you could do with macros. Macro Tools 2, Ultra Macros, was named Insider Magazine Top 10 Star for 1988. So of course everything is still going on. You know, it's not like the world stopped so we could make AppleWorks 3. But by 1989 we had it done. We put about a year into it. As I told somebody back then, it was about the worst rate I ever made on an AppleWorks related project. But it was one of the best time investments, because not only did we have the original source, we could learn a lot more about it. Somehow some really nice hooks and code changes that made our life easier somehow got into there, even though Claris didn't request them. And it turned out rather well for us. What's that?
A slip of the finger.
Yeah, I don't know how'd that code get in there. And then we put some set jump areas where we could always hook into, where if the code moved, we still could get into the jump table and never have to worry about recompiling. That was very important. But anyway, Claris gave us several partial payment deadlines. They called them on-time bonuses. Well, the contract was so small, we viewed them simply as penalties, because we were already having a small contract. And I think the first one, or one of the key ones, was like $2,000. And I had to have the database sorting to meet that milestone. Well, this is expanding the database, or adding a whole bunch of records. Well, the problem is when you sort a database, you need memory to keep track of your pointers as you're rearranging it. So if you have a much bigger database, you have much more memory that's needed. And I had to pull some tricks to do that, because there really just wasn't enough room to do it rapidly and have that. And I was having some trouble with it. I was getting closer. But as we got to within like 3 days of the deadline, I called John Kinder at Claris. I said, John, man, there's no way I can get this done in time. I'm going to get it. I mean, I'm going to master this thing, but I'm not going to get it done this week. And he goes, but I'm not giving up $2,000. I mean, you guys are lowballing us anyway. I mean, what can we do here? And John thought a while, and he goes, well, you know how lawyers are. There's no way we're going to change the contract. He goes, but there's a loophole. And I said, what's that? He goes, it doesn't say anything about performance. It just says it's got to sort. Write a bubble sort. I went, I said, I will have your AppleWorks sorting tonight. So I wrote a bubble sort for the AppleWorks database in about an hour and a half. Of course, back then we didn't do the internet. We did some BBS stuff, but I burned a disk and, duplicated a disk and shipped it off. And I get a call a couple days later from a Claris tester, the head of testing, goes, your database sort is broken. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, we loaded up, the big database, the new size, like whatever, I don't know, 16,000 records, I can't remember, whatever it was, 8,000. Because we loaded up a big database and we sorted, and like 15 minutes later it was just locked up. And I started laughing. I said, 15 minutes? I said, you run that thing all night, that many records, we're looking at least 6 hours here. And he goes, what? He goes, you can't do that, this has got to be fast. And I said, no, look at the contract, there's nothing in there about speed. I wasn't going to give away John was on my side. I just said, there's nothing in there about speed. I said, look, I'm writing a fast merge sort, but I can't get it done in time, and I'm not giving up my bonus, which is really a penalty. I said, the contract says it's got to sort. I said, before you go home tonight, load in that database, hit sort, come back in the morning, it should be done. So the next day the guy calls me, goes, well, it looks like it took about 7 hours, but it sorted perfectly. So you get your bonus. About a week later I had the merge sort done, and I think it sorted the same database in 3 minutes. So. But I will always owe, I haven't seen John Kinder for 20 years, but I guess I could owe him another coffee or something, because he saved me $2,000 with the brilliant solution. Just write a bubble sort. So that's what life's like with contract deals. Eventually we finished. We saw AppleWorks 3 ship. We got the updated apps. Of course, we're thrilled because we know we can do so much more in the future as well. And customers were ecstatic because, 3.0 was a really cool upgrade. When you look at what AppleWorks had been to that point, 3.0 was a pretty major change. And so we start thinking about, well, what's next? So one idea we had was, well, what if we created a 2GS only version? We love our 2E fans, but the GS is where it's at in hardware. What if we created a version that had both text and graphical interfaces that you could just key switch away? Because all the internal data is all the same, all that stuff. So what if you could type in a bunch of stuff in the word processor, hit a key, go into graphics mode, and now you can see your super fonts type stuff right in your document. You can still edit, it's not just a view mode, but you can actually have a work in AppleWorks. But if you don't have a zip GS or something, you can still switch back into text for most of your work and just use the graphical mode to see specific graphical stuff. And if you had a really fast 2GS, you could just work in graphics mode all day long and have a graphics word processor, but the exact same code would work in both. And we thought that would be a really cool way to do things. But of course the problem was that Apple was focusing on the Mac so much, we just couldn't really justify the time. There was rumors for a while that Bill Mench's new 65832 chip might get used. He spoke here at Kansas Fest, talked about that chip about 93, somewhere in there. Do you remember what year that was, Tony? Yeah.
He was here in 89 and 91, 92.
Yeah, 91, 92, somewhere. But he had a 65832, so that would have been really cool because it could move twice as much data with one instruction as the 16-bit chip. But anyway, obviously none of that ever happened. So we just kept enhancing AppleWorks as was. My friend Lester Simpson, the guy I told you about at the school, he came out with FlexiCal in 89, and I took him along to the last couple Apple Fests, and he still talks about that. It's 22 years later. We had a lot of fun with that. Mark Munns did Mr. Invoice, which was a very complex Ultra Macros program that did very specific, detailed invoicing. Mark and I released Macro Ease, which was a bunch more tools, some timeout apps and sample macros and stuff to ease your macro load. And then it turned out, it was really weird, I was researching AppleWorks 3 word processor, and I found out that there was some really handy code changes that somehow made it easier to support an outliner program and be able to hide text. And so I took advantage of that beautiful gift, forgetting that I was the one that had put them in the first place. And I was so far along, I thought, it'd be kind of cool to write the whole outliner in there and then just change one byte because that would be the easiest install program ever. It would just change one byte, turn on the outliner. But then somebody else would, John Link or somebody would make a patch disk that was turn on outliner, and I still want to sell it. So I wrote the outliner program in separate code. But anyway, I had to make some changes in the word processor because it wasn't set up originally to be able to hide text and still scroll through. But with the changes we made in 3.0, made outliner a piece of cake, and we wrote the code for that. So that was another thing that came out there in '90. Beagle is getting eager to get into the Mac market, and so here's where the story gets a little different. We had a project called Cheetah. What are Cheetahs known for? Speed, yeah. We were not happy with any of the stuff that was out there for the Mac. We thought, we should do something. We want AppleWorks type speed. We want to make a project called Cheetah. Let's take everything we know about integrated software from AppleWorks and do AppleWorks for the Mac. If Apple probably doesn't want to be part of it, and they probably want too much, so we'll call it something else, but it'll be AppleWorks for the Mac. And we'll make millions of dollars, and we can all finally cash in on this whole Silicon Valley thing, even though we're in Silicon Beach down in San Diego. So the concept was brilliant. We actually created a shell program that would read in modules and add them to a menu. Now the beauty of it was like timeout, you could have your add-ons, but this was everything. So the word processor was a module, the database was a module, the spreadsheet, the telecom. All it was one shell, and then everything was a module. That meant that you could add a new type of database or a new upgraded word processor without affecting anything else. You don't have to rebuild the whole program. Everything would be a separate module. And a standard interface, so everything would share data. You could cut and paste between them, and Apple had its publish and subscribe technology back then, which ended up in BeagleWorks. But we would create the smooth integration of AppleWorks where everything would be together, and of course there'd be a full-blown programming language beyond ultra macros that would control everything. Everything would be replaceable. So we started brainstorming, and there was Alan and Rob and Mark and me and a couple guys, Morgan Davis, some of you might know him from the telecom stuff, Proline, whatever. He was involved at Beagle by then, and there was another couple, Joe Holt, who did Flash and some other stuff. So there was a team of us, and we were getting really excited because we thought, nobody's done this right. We've got so much experience from AppleWorks, we can really kick some butt on the Mac. And then the day came when Beagle Brothers offered us contracts. Mark brought in the contracts. They were 1%. And we're like, we're used to getting 17 to 20%. Now, obviously, we got to divide it between more guys, but 1% wasn't going to cut it. At least 4% probably would have been the minimum we wanted. 5 would have been nice. But 1% wasn't going to work. The damage was done, and next thing you know, Rob and Alan and John are off forming West Code Software, publishing Alan's stuff, and I'm moving to Denver, and just that was the end of the Beagle as we knew it. Still stayed friends with Mark and everything. He had expenses that Apple marketing was a lot more expensive in the Mac world. The magazines cost a lot more per ad and all that. But we just weren't willing to risk it for the amount of money that he was willing to pay. So, like I said, still good friends and everything, but it just wasn't going to work financially on either side. So we moved on. Mark licensed all the. Thought I had one more slide in here. Well, anyway, Mark had licensed the Beagle products to Quality by then, and he was getting out of the Apple II business. Meanwhile, I was still doing Apple II stuff with Jim. I did do the ProDOS version of IO Silver, Brad Wilhelmsen's great game. And then you double date. I talked to Jim about Total Control here. That came out with the Dan and I worked on that. He was getting really good at the database by then. Did double data that went from 30 to 60 categories. A guy named Daniel Leroux did AppleWorks 3.0 to French, where he converted every text message in AppleWorks, which was huge. I mean, there's hundreds of text strings. He converted them all to French, made a patch disk. I marketed that through Jim. And then he sent us a really cool thing that never saw the light of day, but he created a color printing version of Timeout Superfonts. And I remember seeing a printout where there was words in red and blue and stuff like that. Really cool, but for whatever reason, Mark was getting more into Mac stuff, and he never pursued it, but otherwise there could have been a color printing version of Superfonts. Anyway, released DBPix, which was database pictures, it was really cool because it looked like you were getting graphics on the text screen, and all I did was I copied the text screen to high-res graphics, so now you had a perfect clone. I mean, a pixel's a pixel, right? Looking at a screen, you can't tell if it's a text screen or if it's a graphical image of that screen. So I would copy the screen, and then I'd overlay the graphic, and so you'd be in AppleWorks, you'd hit one key, and then it would look like suddenly you had a graphics mode in the corner of your AppleWorks screen, which is kind of fun. Anyway, we continued on. Beagle eventually shipped their integrated product called BeagleWorks in '92. I wrote the tutorial for it, so I did end up having a part of that. That got sold to WordPerfect. It became WordPerfect Works. Corel was involved, Novell. I mean, there was all these companies it was getting sold through. And it got some good reviews for a while, did okay. Mark, and when he sold it, he moved up to Utah as part of the deal, and Mark Munz also. And then Mark ended up working later for Intuit and went on with a couple of companies. He worked for Corel. So we had people moving, not only splitting apart in terms of our publishing, but literally moving out of state. I was in Colorado. Mark moved over to Utah, and of course the old Beagle was no more. But in 1993, I'd done some PC stuff in between, but my heart was still in AppleWorks. And I had a bunch of ideas in '93, and I had the idea for Quadriga. Quadriga is the 4-horse chariot there, you see. And I wanted to do an AppleWorks 4 that would add a bunch more features. And I thought, if we do it ourselves, we don't have to sell that many to make it worth it. We're not going to get rich off it, but I mean, we could sell it for a few bucks. We could probably still justify the code. So I talked to my friend Dan, the guy that I did database total control stuff with, Double Data. And he was excited about it. He wasn't having any fun what he was doing, and he thought that would be a lot more enjoyable. So I contacted Joe Gleason, and I said, Joe, Claris and Apple, they're focused on the Mac. They don't even remember that we still have all the source code. we can take the original source code, we can create a new program, and then we tell them, if you give us the naming rights to AppleWorks, we'll pay you for it. And if you don't, we'll just make a giant patch disk called The Works. You can't stop us. I mean, precedent is there of patching AppleWorks. So there's no legal grounds for it. We just won't tell them that we're actually creating the whole program, and then just insert your installed disk. Yep, they've got AppleWorks. Okay, copy the whole new version of AppleWorks, and away they go. It was going to be the ultimate patch disk. It was the whole program. So the lawyers didn't want to do it. They said, no, we can't let you use the name. It's like Apple owns the rights, and Claris is doing Mac, and you can't do it. And Joe said, okay, I'm sorry, we'll keep all the money then because we're doing it. And they go, wait a minute, yeah, okay, well, you give us a cut, you can have the name. So Joe had already mocked up boxes that said Works 4.0. I mean, he was ready either way. It was either going to be AppWorks 4.0 or Works 4.0. And notice the Works. So he'd been playing around with the Works 4 and AppWorks, but we finally got the official go-ahead. Quality gave us royalty advances for living expenses while we developed it. There were no major problems because we knew what we were doing. I mean, this was our code. So it wasn't like we had any major hurdles. It was just a matter of getting the new features in. So we put in a bunch of new features and incorporated our products, the Macro Player. And Joe flew us and our mustaches out to Michigan, and we shot some video there. Had fun with that, toured Quality. It shipped November 1st. The first month's sales were enough to pay back all of our advances and make the project worth it. I mean, literally the project paid for itself the first month. Now the bummer is all the excited people ordered it the first month. Sales dropped pretty quick because all the diehards were waiting for a new AppleWorks. But still, it was well worth it. So we brainstormed some more ideas, and we had the idea for Narnia, which I announced here at Kansas Fest in '94, which was the last time I was here, and that was AppleWorks 5. We rolled in Outliner, Ultra Macros, or Afterworks Screensaver that I'd done with Matt Reimer. And then we made a bunch of new enhancements, like remember the last 9 files loaded, so you could just grab it, load it up real quick. My twins were born that spring, and they just graduated from high school. And so I think it's time for return to the publisher. We're rebooting Gem Software for the 3rd time. And what better way to restart a software company that's focused on iOS than with an old Beagle Brothers game. So Return to the Professor. IO Silver, we're going to be releasing IO Silver as an iOS game here pretty soon, hopefully. I've strode it to a couple people on my iPhone already, some of the early stages. Does anyone remember Jay Jennings, Mohawk Man? He had the 12-inch blonde mohawk. I know Tony does. But he's doing the coding. Ross Lambert, who's 816 Journal and Ariel Publishing, he's working with me on that. And we've got some cool modern iPad 3 high-res color art for the professor. Notice the purple polka dot bow tie. So the professor looks a lot more like the original Beagle box that Bert designed back in the day. And so we'll have iPad Retina version, iPhone Retina version, but of course we'll have that retro version that looks just like the Apple II as well. So we're excited about that and some other ideas that we have. But good software never dies. It's always fun to play that old retro stuff. So hopefully if you've got an iOS device, when we get this released, you'll support that and play some games on iOS over like the good old days. Well, I Googled AppleWorks 5 to get a graphic. And that's what I got. I have no idea how that happened. It looks like Chumley from Pawn Stars. But timely and quality computer repair from your friends at Best Buy. Go figure. Try it yourself. Just Google AppleWorks 5. That's what you get. So I don't have a graphics for that. But we released that at the same time. Mark Munz released his Deja 2 emulator for Mac OS. And 10 years later, 2005, he released Deja 2X for Mac OS 10. And so AppleWorks can still be run that way. The beauty of Mark's is because he's emulating specifically for AppleWorks, he's hooking into memory management, disk saving, printing, a lot of really cool things. So it's a fun way to run AppleWorks on your Mac. But bottom line is, it didn't sell well enough to justify a version 6, GS only or otherwise. So we knew that was the end of AppleWorks, but we decided that after 10 years with AppleWorks, I wanted to take advantage of some of the stuff I learned, and Ross wanted to do a spell checker for the Mac, and we lost. I don't think Lane's here right now, but Lane was telling me about it, that he loved that spell checker. It was really fast, really good suggestion. Got a lot of rave reviews, best Mac spell checker, blah blah blah. I spent 14 months with Ross creating that. Poured my heart into it, late nights, rave reviews, and when it was all said and done, I made $20,000 for 14 months' work. So that was pretty much the end of programming. That was a downtime to be doing Mac stuff. We did some basic, object-oriented basic language under contract from Apple that halfway through the project, our guy there got canned, and when they had all the cutbacks in the mid-90s, so that put an end to that. And I went back into education. I started teaching programming and stuff like that. And actually, one of my former students right now is the main Android programmer for the Hulu Plus app on Android. So that's kind of fun to see old students working on stuff. They like my Manson look when they were doing a bad job. I am wearing a wig there, just so you don't get too afraid. But those are some good days teaching. I did want to thank a couple people from the past. Some of you know a lot of them, you might want to hear. First of all, I got to start with guys that made it possible for you to be here. Ken Gagney. I wouldn't be here without him. He's not my dad, but he's that. By the way, that is Mike's high-res card he uses for video conferencing. That, or I did some cut and paste. But the Open Apple podcast, running into Canada, Denver Apple Pie is really what resulted in me being here. So thanks, Ken. That's the same shirt, but I did wash it in between. Then there's Three Easy Pieces. We got to thank them. Band in the 70s. That's not them. The Three Easy Pieces on top, that's Bob Lissner's Apple III version that became AppleWorks. The band had nothing to do with it, but when I Googled Three Easy Pieces, that's what I found. So they look like cool 70s guys. A couple of quick friends and acquaintances. Dean Esme. A lot of you probably know his name. And Ice Baby. I broke my wrist playing basketball at Kansas Fest, so he donated some of his beer chest ice for me until I could get to a doctor. But Dean's been a friend for many decades. Jack Friedman's an AppleWorks user daily until last year when I converted him over to a browser-based system that I've got Command Z that will toggle between multi and single record layouts and lots of AppleWorks style stuff in the browser. But he ran his business on 2GSs up until last year, which is pretty amazing. Paul Statt, Insider Editor, was a big supporter of Beagle and Time Out. Warren Williams, of course, set up a lot of stuff. Will Nelkin was one of my first roommates at Kansas Fest. He said to say hi to everybody here today. And he wrote the Ultra to the Max book. And I think, I had a t-shirt that he made, but I misplaced it somewhere. Mark Munz, Time Out Favorites. He I surveyed the guys, and he said his favorite was Ultra Macros for some reason, probably because he helped work on some of the add-ons later, like Debug. Of course, did Deja 2X. Worked for WordPerfect, Corral and Intuit. Right now, he's independent with his own unmarked software. He's got Tech Soap. You may have heard of that. And that's what Mark's doing. Dan Verkade, I asked him his timeout favorites. He said all of them, so I picked one for him, timeout grammar. That's because when he made that for quality, they got sued by a guy who claimed he copied it, and so he learned all about the court system. They had to fly him out to Pennsylvania to testify and all that. But they won. The guy didn't win the court case. His favorite code was writing the floating point code. Do any of you remember the SANE engine? S-A-N-E is for floating point. It was too big with the new spreadsheet. We couldn't fit the SANE engine in the spreadsheet, so we had to take the key routines we needed, and Dan had to write a subset that would do those floating point calculations, and so we could fit it into the new AppleWorks. So he had fun doing that. He then worked at Symantec on their Peter Norton utilities, and right now he's flipping a house. He's taking a break from programming, and he's remodeling a house that he's going to sell, so doing a whole different thing. And he says hi to everybody too. Rob Renstrom, he had a girlfriend named Anna, so Bert always called him Rob and Anna. His timeout favorite, I'm guessing, was Graph. I have no idea what he's doing. Nobody knows where Rob is. I asked every single Beagle guy, and everybody lost track of Rob, but he was a good programmer. Bert is the founder of Beagle. He did trains for a while. He sold little rubber railroad ties you could put in your model trains that would muffle the sound. The rubber would absorb the vibrations. Built some amazing layouts. And then he got into Barnyard Owls. Now he has a new website called birdflix.com. He has a California birds one that comes with like a peaks and pokes chart of birds, color bird identifier chart. So check out birdflix.com. He's kind of reclusive, doesn't really want to talk to anybody about the Apple II days, but he's big into birds. Alan Bird, different bird. His timeout favorite was Quick Spell that he wrote. Of course, he loved doing that one. And the one he didn't write, his favorite was Graph, because it was just so cool doing graphs in there. You see him with a couple of his grandkids there. He worked at Qualcomm for 9 years and now currently develops iOS apps and is busy doing that. And I hadn't been in touch with him for 20 years, so thanks to K-Fest, I reconnected with him and had several great conversations with Alan. Tom Weiser, Pronto DOS, Frame Up, of course, all the Central publications. I worked for Timeout Central, Kansas Fest founder, and I contacted him Monday. He said, tell the guys hi. He's in the process of moving from New York to Pittsburgh, so I assume his wife Kathleen has a new professor job at one of the schools out there, because he just kind of does his thing on the computer and they move wherever she's teaching. She teaches master's programs and stuff like that. Mark Simonson, of course, the founder of Software Touch with Alan and one of the first Beagle guys. His timeout favorites, yay, Ultra Macros, thank you, Mark. Quick Spell, Graph, entrepreneur extraordinaire, as you heard last year. He buys and sells companies every few months, it seems. So Mark's a great guy. I've known him for a long time and always enjoyed keeping in touch with his family, Christmas newsletters, that kind of thing. They're a great family. Andy Nicholas, my roommate at K-Fest years ago. He spent 7 years at Apple and 7 years at Microsoft. He did Shrink It and NewFX. He's now at Nintendo. So Andy gets around, great guy. I haven't talked to him for years. I'm trying to track him down, but I had to include him. And Newbie Chuck. Chuck Newbie was the head Beagle buddy. He was the guy we got to know in San Diego. And you're probably looking at that and going, like, why is it Newbie, Chuck instead of Chuck Newbie? Well, when you look at all this talent gathered together, these key people, it's important to see when you put those names all together, because tomorrow the dark man rises. So anyway, Bert, Alan, Tom, Mark, Andy, and Newbie Chuck, it's all about Batman. Thank you.
I don't know if we want to take a few questions, 5-10 minutes. We'll be cutting into lunch a little if some of you want to go off to lunch. But just remember to
questions
come back at 1:45.
Chuck Newby in the user group support program, the Beagle Buddy program. You know, I was active in that, or my user group was, and I thought that was the best piece of marketing that ever.
Yeah, I think Chuck came to us with the idea because he was doing it at his own user group, and he said, I mean, it's really handy if we can just get an update, and then he can take care of copying it for everybody. And then we just said, Chuck, you're doing such a good job, and he said, I'll manage it, and I'll contact other user groups. And yeah, to me, it was a brilliant support move. And from a programmer standpoint, it really cut down on the number of tech support letters and stuff that we got. So that was brilliant. Yes.
My wife was a Beagle buddy for years.
All right.
I listened to a lot of the conversations on the phone, right? And it was generally about 1/3 tech support and 2/3 evangelism.
Yeah.
She was so sold on it that she got other people in it. You got
Yeah,
my business that way.
it's like the road, what do they call them? The road teams and what, like bands do that a lot nowadays on Facebook and stuff. They get out there and promote their product. The Beagle Buddies were one of our great marketing ploys because they could do demos, and so we started getting into the idea, hey, let's send them early stuff. Let's send them things that maybe aren't out there. Give them some goodies that will make them excited, and they can go show a user group like, here's what's coming. And so we did a little bit of that kind of stuff too. So that was a great program. There was another hand here, Jim.
Yeah, I was with another partner, really, Polly Bookout, ran the Big Apple user group for years, and we had, luckily we had a professor of computer science and math from Rutgers, Newark, and we had another professor of engineering technology from New York City Technical College, so that we had a good base there for demos and stuff. And but I remember using the database. I liked AppleWorks 4 and 5 because it was no longer just a flat file system. Because of those functions, we call them functions. I forget.
Yeah, in the database.
Yeah, because what I could do when I saw that prevrec, I think was the function.
Yeah, and then
I knew that I could do, you know, this column, prevrec this column, and compare for duplicate records. Also, what I could do is that I create new columns that were combinations like first name, last name, I don't know what else, address, and then I could look for duplicates for anyone, create a separate column, look for duplicates. So I could really manipulate it like a database finally. And I mean, people in my user group, because this is Apple II users, and the virtue of the Apple II is it's intuitive and easy to use, so it's hard to explain to them why just looking at the list and, you know, sorting it and looking at it visually is probably sufficient for most purposes, but you still don't know that you missed something. You still don't know that you don't have a duplicate. I guess programming is obsessive, and they weren't obsessive.
Well, we tried to keep the ease of use and bring more power. By the way, I think Glenn Breeden, who wrote Merlin and ProCell, I believe he was at Rutgers also.
Oh, I met his son. I was in the Unix. His son was teaching a Unix class, part of the out of the New York. Was the PC user group, and I mentioned that I was trying to get a hold of Merlin. He said, "Oh, my father wrote that."
Oh, wow, that's cool.
You know?
In the back.
You had to work with quality for doing AppleWorks 4 and 5. I
Yeah.
was just wondering if you ever got to see the source code for AppleWorks GS, and was it as bad as everyone says?
I had nothing to do with that. There were people who said, well, yeah, I mean, they never were able to build it. I mean, the source code was unusable, so I don't know what happened there. Obviously, it was built at some point because they had a product, but the source code never matched up. So I don't know if somebody got mad and, you know, got rid of the actual disk, or just incompetence, or what happened. But yeah, that whole thing was just a huge disaster. Thankfully, I was moving away from Beagle by then, and I was just doing stuff on AppleWorks for quality and my own stuff. Tony?
It actually didn't build.
But I'm saying somebody built it.
It built in chunks, and then
Yeah.
they sit and put it together manually.
Right, but
Yeah.
my understanding was that even the source they did have never built properly to even do the chunks.
Yeah.
Did Jim Merritt waste like several weeks trying to get that working?
And I actually ended up seeing a bunch of it. It's
Yeah.
because of these things.
It was a fiasco, yeah. Now, see, with AppleWorks, it was a huge project, but it was all in MPW, which had a huge capacity, and on the Macs, it was easy to build. We had no problems with that stuff. But was there someone over here? Oh, nope, just stretching. Yeah.
When you did that first build on the Mac, do you remember which Mac it was?
Yeah, the Mac 2 I showed you on there. Yeah. I had an SE30 was my first Mac, but we all got Mac 2s for that project. So all of us had matching Mac 2s with MPW.
Just a stupid question. The Beagle brother from Houston was a lady from hell.
Oh, Beverly Cadgio?
That's right. I was
Yeah.
reading there.
Well, let
I
me
figured
tell you.
Remember, thank you.
Let me tell you a quick story. Bev was really good to me, and she flew me out to Houston to speak at a user group. And
Probably my user group.
yeah, and I met her husband, and he was a character. And he picked me up at the airport, and his first response was, "So what's the old BITCH got you here for again anyway?" This is his wife. That's your wife. Okay, so that was a little bit of a scary situation. I thought, what have I got myself into here? But
we called her worse than that.
well, I had a good time there. Bev treated me well, and we had fun. I was hoping to get to go to the Astrodome to see a ball game because I'm a little bit of a baseball fan. When I was in Kansas City, I got to go see a Royals game. But yeah, she was very active promoting Ultra Macro. She wrote a lot of articles, and she did a lot of good stuff to promote the AppleWorks. Is that it? All right, thanks for coming. And,